Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon, Rabbi.
So hope that you're all well and staying healthy and safe.
Yes.
The So we're actually, if we continue with the Hasidic stories and the legends and the lessons, etc. Wanted to give you, if you're not familiar with, wanted to give you a little taste of another aspect of the Hasidic way of doing things, of finding insights and finding, I guess, what we would call idiosyncrasies and little things. So here's an example to lead us into the stories. I guess it's listed as number 5. There may be a page 9. I hope that you were able to get clearer copies of the stories that Ruth Ann and James.
Yes,
Thank
you.
So this one says learning to love. Of course the important word is love, which in Hebrew is ahava. And some of you may be familiar with a little, again, I'll call it a shtick. It's a teaching practice similar to mnemonics, which I can never spell, but I love using mnemonics. But it's called gematria. Now, gematria works. It's a numbers game, and it helps you remember certain words or make connections between words or remember words or phrases or whatever. And gematria is based on the idea that each Hebrew letter in the alphabet has a numerical value. So Aleph is 1, and Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4, all the way on through the 20-some letters, because they don't include the final number, the final letters, and they don't include, it's not Bet and Vet, it would be Bet or Vet, or Pay or Fay, and whatever. So you take all the letters and you add up the numerical value of a particular word. So here's how they work as an introduction with the word ahava, which is love. Okay, so you can do it with me. The Aleph is 1, Hey is 5, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Okay, so Hey is 5. So now we're at 6, right? Then the Bet or the Vet is 2. So that makes a total of
8.
7.
8.
8. We're on an elementary level here, so okay. So we're at 8, and then a final the Hey at the end is an additional 5, so that gives us
13.
13. Okay, so 13 is the number of love. No, it doesn't have anything to do with bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah kid might love himself or love the presents or whatever, but ahava is worth 13. Okay, all right. Now remember, and we will encounter this, of course, in the stories about love. The ones that we have in this collection is, remember the phrase from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, love your neighbor as yourself, right? That leads into the golden rule and whatever, but love your neighbor as yourself. So how many people are actually being loved in that quote, in that mitzvah?
13.
Right? You love your neighbor and you love yourself.
Too.
Which means that what do we need to do to the number 13? We have to
Double it.
Right. 6.
What?
Right?
What?
2 times 13. Okay. Now, which word, important and connecting for us, is also a value of 26, is the 4-letter name for God. Okay, which we pronounce as Adonai. Some people or Yehovah or something like that. So count with me. A Yud, which is 10, and then A, which is 5. So we're now at
15.
15.
which is 6. So 15
21.
21,
21.
and then a hey at the end is another 5.
26.
26. In other words, when you love your neighbor as yourself, it's 26, which is Adonai, which is God. God is present in that love. And how do we know that that's actually the case? Because the entire quotation from the book of Leviticus is love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's the entire
Ani
quotation.
Adonai.
Ani
Any
Adonai.
Adonai.
It all ties together. So that's a
right,
that's
I
a
have a
good
quick-
that the Hasidim love to play. Also, if you didn't like the lesson as it was in a story, you could play around with the letters and make the words fit. Also, but just like anything with statistics, you can make it fit however you want. Yes, Bobby. Bobby, you were raising a hand?
Yes. Is anyone else having trouble hearing Rabbi Norm?
Yeah,
Yes.
he's breaking
Yeah,
up.
in and out, breaking.
Breaking up every-
again?
Yeah.
I hear you perfectly.
Oi,
I can
Huh?
see it.
Hello.
Just every so often I'm missing words.
I froze out of a meeting yesterday, but so I'm trying from a different room, but it shouldn't.
Okay,
my
now
Wi-Fi
you-
is
Right
working
now,
fine.
you're
What are you
good.
doing?
Fine
You're
now.
freezing. You're in
Right now,
Green
you're
Valley.
good.
It's been hot.
Give me
Don't
a-
relax.
Give me a
Don't
high
relax.
sign or something if
You have to
if
move
Okay.
I have to
forward.
repeat something. Do I have to go back over all the numerical gematria?
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
no,
All right.
that's
I wonder if
26
we
and Ani
mute-
Adonai.
I wonder if we mute some of our channels and get more bandwidth.
John's suggesting that if everybody mutes
Yes.
except unless you do have a question. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe you'll give us more bandwidth.
Okay. Well,
I don't know.
It's
We'll
not-
try it, I
it's
think.
not my bandwidth. I'm the only one home. Okay. All right. So Hasidic tales. On again, it's page 9 or the Learning to Love chapter number 5. This selection. Rabbi Moshe Leib, and we went a little bit into the connection of the genealogy last week. We don't have to go back into it today. Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassoth tells the story. I was sitting in an inn among peasants who were drinking heavily, and I heard this conversation between two of them. The first one said, "Do you love me?" And don't forget they're drinking.
Mhm.
The second peasant, "Of course I love you. You're dearer to me than my brother." "Do you love me as you love yourself? Remember, love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord."
Yeah.
The second peasant answers, "This is more. Well, if you love me so much, why haven't you noticed that I've cut my hand and the blood is flowing?" From him, the observing Rabbi Moshe Leib says, "I learned that to love means to feel the pain of a friend." Okay. How many of you have heard the phrase or even used the phrase, if you are my friend, can you feel my pain? Kind of thing. I remember back in the 1960s, and maybe this is a lesson that we all need to keep in mind for the next several weeks or months, we did a program at the temple that I was involved with in the 1960s in Black Jewish relations. And the theme was, can you feel my pain? If you really want to understand me, if you really want to know me, can you feel my pain? So I just throw that out as a thought and as a theme. Lost you again, huh?
Excuse me, somebody isn't muted and they're making all kinds of noise.
Yeah, they're clicking.
Cooking.
Okay, well,
Maybe
I'm
it's their
trying to-
fan.
Rabbi.
What is it, Sherry?
Well, I'm
I
here. No, I was
apologize.
for the rabbi.
Look at that.
I wanted
Everyone
to,
mute except the
I wanted to input a comment, reaction.
Okay,
Rabbi.
go ahead. Just, we won't be able to make sure that everybody's with us. Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. I've never had it said in that way, but to me, it's the same as walking in another man's shoes,
Right.
right? Same
Okay.
thing.
Mhm. Can you really know someone without either figuratively or realistically putting yourself in their shoes, or today we might say in their skin, or from their particular perspective and mode of thinking. I came across this quote also: more than mere physical or verbal expression, it is an interest in the other person, attentiveness, feeling his pain and difficulty as a human being still created in the image of God. That's the Jewish lesson that comes out of this. Look at the two stories further up. It talks about one of my favorites. We don't list him among the major Hasidic rebbes or teachers. That's Rabbi Shmelka. It may be because of his name. The Shmelka is not one of those highly identifiable names. Shmelka was the rabbi of Nikolsburg. Not sure where that was. If anybody's traveled in Poland or Lithuania, you might know where Nikolsburg is. But he was in the earlier generation of the Hasidic rebbes. Died in 1778. To Shmelka, the story goes, Jews came from everywhere bringing him gifts of money and precious objects, yet Rabbi Shmelka remained a poor man all his days. Nor did the rabbi ever say, "I have no small change for you," when someone came to him to seek tzedakah, to seek charity. One day, having nothing in the house to give away but a costly ring that was brought to him that morning by a rich disciple, he handed it to the beggar, saying, "I'm sorry, this is all I have." The beggar went away. The wife came into the room a few moments later, asking to see the ring. He answered, "But I've just given it away." "Oh, please," cried out the wife, "run after the beggar. I know that ring was worth at least 400 golden ducats." Again, I don't know how much a ducat was worth, but it obviously was worth a great amount of money. So Rabbi Shmelka listened to his wife, immediately ran out of the house, caught up with the beggar, and breathlessly said, "My wife just told me that the ring I gave you is worth at least 400 golden ducats. Be sure not to sell it for any less than that."
Oh, God.
Okay? So smart man, smart man, but genuine in his love, even for the beggars, even for those who came to his house. Okay. Next section, the next page 10, or it says loving through serving.
Mhm.
Some of these, I must admit, or expect that you've heard either in the little more than a year that we've been together, because I've quoted some of these stories in sermons or classes, or maybe with previous rabbis or classes, or reading the literature. You've seen these. They're some of the most famous ones. Rabbi Moshe Leib used to attend fairs to make himself helpful to man or beast. One day, the wagoners and traders joined the crowd watching a troupe of acrobats. Rabbi Moshe Leib looked around and saw that the horses of the wagoners and the cattle of the traders were neglected. Their heads lolled and their tongues hung out with thirst. Thereupon Rabbi Moshe Leib found a bucket, filled it with water, and went from animal to animal, giving it drink, so that he looked exactly like some servant at the fair. One of the wagoners happened to see him and called out, "My good man, my horses over there are in that corner. Water them too." The rabbi nodded, continued exactly as if he were a hireling. When he had made the round, the wagoner reached into his pocket, found a coin, and wanted to give it to the rabbi, but the rabbi smiled and shook his head. "No," he said, "it was not your work that I was doing. Rather, I was doing what God is telling me to do." The emphasis on loving your neighbor, loving all of God's creatures through serving them, deed and action, and that's how you best demonstrate love for God, if you will. The other, another long story, and then two short ones. I love all of these that are on this page. Incidentally, Moshe Leib was also the one, I guess he learned a lot by going to that carnival or going to that fair. He's also the one who said, what do we learn from the High Wire Act? You know, the man or the woman who's walking along a wire. You know, he's not thinking about anything more than just where the next step is going to be, to make sure that he's stepping in the, you know, with confidence and in the right place. Not how high he is, not how far it is, just what the importance of each step. So here there's a story about Rabbi Hirsch. When I was a disciple of Moshe Leib, I had a great longing to see my master performing his midnight devotions during the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I was bold enough to hide myself in his house. At midnight, I was astounded to see the rabbi change his garments while he murmured his prayers and proceeded to put on rough clothes of a peasant with a girdle of rope around his waist. Following on tiptoe at a distance, I saw him pick up an axe and go out into the yard, on the road and into the woods, still holding my breath. I watched him while he cut down a sapling and chopped it into little logs. Then he bound together with the rope and went into a peasant hut where a sick woman lay helpless, shivering with the cold. Pretending to be a peasant himself, the rabbi said, "I have wood to sell very cheap," but the woman answered, "I have no money at all." "When you do have money, you'll pay me," said the rabbi. "I have no one to light the fire," said the woman. "I will light it for you," answered the rabbi. And young Hirsch, who was later to become a well-known Hasidic rabbi himself, heard the rabbi whispering the prayers while he kindled fire and blew it into a cheerful blaze. And then when the hut was warm, the rabbi withdrew and returned to his home. Rabbi Hirsch used to say that was the most magnificent service that I ever attended, and without an invitation. Or today we would say without having a ticket to the High Holy Day services, in a sense. There's a parallel story, some of you know, again, we've quoted, of the Litvak, who the Lithuanian Jews as opposed to the Romanian or the Polish Jews, and they always tried to outdo each other. And so the story is that there's a Litvak who refuses to believe that the Rebbe of the neighboring town is really a tzaddik, is really a saint, and we used those words last time, because his disciples are all saying, our rabbi is the most holy, our rabbi is the most fervent, the most devout, you know, whatever. And every night the rabbi goes up to heaven and speaks directly to God. And the Litvak, of course, is cynical about that and refuses to accept it. And so he says, I'm going to follow this rabbi and see what he really does in the middle of the night. So he hid underneath the rabbi's bed, and when the rabbi gets up in the middle of the night, the Litvak follows him, and the rabbi goes, and he goes similarly to the house or the hut of a sickly woman, and lights her fire and makes her breakfast and whatever. Then the Litvak follows the Rebbe back home and whatever, and he runs into the other disciples, the other students, later in the morning, and they start talking again about how their devout Rebbe is so holy that he goes to heaven every night, and the Litvak looks at them and says, no, not to heaven, he goes even higher. So there's that story. It's a parallel kind of story. But the word that I wanted to focus on for a moment, and then again open it to you, those who wish to unmute themselves. We'll keep our fingers crossed that we don't start to freeze up again. That last phrase, which is Rabbi Hirsch, who was telling the story about Rabbi Moshe of Sasov, He says that what Rabbi Moshe did was the most magnificent service I ever attended. You know, even during the 10 days of repentance, when traditionally Jews are in the shul, they're at worship, they're at study, they're offering penitential prayers all 10 days. But the Hebrew word that he would have been using here is a word with which you're probably familiar, and that's the Hebrew word avodah, right? Now, avodah is an interesting word. First of all, some of you may remember the phrase from Pirkei Avot that the world is established on three things, right? On Torah, we translated it on Torah, on worship, and on deeds of loving kindness. But the Hebrew word there is avodah, so avodah is worship, but avodah is also divine service. It's doing those things that either bring God closer to our world or serving God, but above and beyond, out of the prayer book. And the question is, I suppose, the question that I throw out is, what's the connection between using avodah as service, whether it's reading from the prayer book or whether it's doing these kind of loving acts that serve as worship or as service, again, depending whatever word you want to use. And the fact that avodah also is slavery. It's also, remember from Pesach, from Passover, and from the Haggadah, avadim hayinu, we were slaves unto Pharaoh. It's the same word. So who makes the distinction between what we do and what we do as service, as labor, if it's for divine purposes or if it's for serving a master without any expectation of compensation? Or what is there a connection? Anyone want to jump in with that kind of question? Why is it the same word? Avodah, for divine worship, for service to God, service to humanity, or for slavery when you don't have a choice. Gloria was first, at least on my screen. You're muted, Gloria. Gloria, you're muted. I don't know if I I can't, Ruth Ann left it. Gloria, can you unmute?
She's frozen, I think.
Frozen? I don't know. We don't hear you. I'm trying. Someday soon we'll develop all the technological expertise.
Well,
Right?
Then it'll change.
Sign language would help.
if somebody wave at her, so where she's not looking.
She's trying to read something else. I don't know. It was a funny
She's
one.
having
Okay.
fun.
I got it. I can
Oh,
hear
yeah, I
you.
knew that.
There you are. Hey. Okay,
Hey.
gotcha.
Forgot what I was going to say now. Something about it being the same thing, because master, the word master can be used for in both situations, can't it? You do something for your master, you're doing something for God. Who is your master? No? You're looking baffled.
Small m or capital M.
Right.
Either.
No, actually, I was baffled because I was trying to work out the wording of a different kind of response in my mind. That and I started to give a hint about that, is something to do with being compensated for the work or
You
for
don't,
this- for the
oh, okay,
service.
doing it without
Yeah.
compensation.
Right.
A slave works
in
without-
one case, because slavery obviously
Right.
doesn't include compensation.
Right,
Other than the hope of being released and finding freedom someday. But service to God or to humanity in God's name also is not for the sake of compensation.
right. That was the hint you
from the
gave.
Jewish point of view. It's not
Yes.
like we're earning stars on our head or, or merit badge points or something like that. Now, that's not necessarily, incidentally, that's not necessarily the Hasidic way of looking at what we talked about last week, or at least I mentioned, this world versus the world to come. Okay, according to some of the Hasidic rabbis, yes, you could, and I hate to use the Santa Claus image, but yes, you could have a list, and God checks it twice, of who's naughty and who's nice. You could have a list of how many of the mitzvot you had performed, and that might make it easier for you to get into, but that's not the mainstream position. It's not the normative position at all. So, okay. Anyone else want
Well,
to come in? Share, please.
okay, well, what I remember distinctly was a song that I learned way back when, Echelutz Leman Avodah. Avodah Leman Echelutz. I don't know the meaning of all the words,
Well, okay.
but I
that's-
recognized Avodah.
Yeah, you're right. Right. That's the song of the pioneers in the early Zionist movement coming to Palestine. That Hechalutz Laman Avodah, Avodah Laman Hechalutz. That a pioneer exists for the sake of labor.
Okay.
That's labor rather than service. Okay, and that Avodah Laman Echalutz, and that labor, working the land, and and preparing for the state, in a sense, of the Zionist dream. That kind of labor is the definition of a pioneer. That's what that's about. Right.
I'm sorry, because when I heard the word today from you, I remembered that in that song, it meant work, labor. So
As opposed to some of the other lyrics of the song, zoom golly golly golly, zoom golly golly golly,
Yes.
which is all nonsense syllables, right?
okay,
Right.
so labor is one of the meanings. You could use it in sort of different ways.
In modern Hebrew, if we go back to the 19th century and Eliezer ben Yehuda's development of the modern Hebrew language. Matter of fact, the avodah is the word that the official political party, the Labor Party, uses in Israel.
That makes sense.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll go on. We're never going to get through all the stories anyway, but so I may skip around a little bit. So there's two short ones here, and then I want to add one or two that aren't within this category, that aren't necessarily in your collection. So a rabbi passing through a village in a cart stopped when he saw a peasant boy bending over some objects in deep concentration. Wondering what could so enthrall the youngster, he got down from his cart and saw how the peasant boy was binding the broken leg of a rabbit with strips torn from his shirt. The next morning, when the rabbi was putting on his phylacteries, his tefillin, that you wrap around your arm and that you put on your forehead, when he was doing that for himself, he said, he offered this prayer: may the winding of these phylacteries around my arm be as acceptable in heaven as the binding up of the rabbits. I'll put my glasses back on of the rabbit's leg, you know, of care for even the smallest of God's creatures can be an act of avodah, of service, not of labor, you know, of a slavery, but of voluntary service to God. A rabbi was once approached by a very respectable householder, a man of wealth, learning, and piety, spending so much of his time among wastrels. There's a new word, wastrels and criminals and unworthy people of all sorts. Rabbi, said the householder, how can you stand the company of such people? Their manners and their language are so low. How can you sink to their level? The rabbi answered, if your friend falls into the mud and you want to help him, you must be prepared to get a little dirty yourself. Okay.
Wow.
That was not one of the bases of sermons to rabbis about to be ordained. However, I will, you know, talking about dealing with boards of trustees. No, it wasn't like that. A wealthy man, this you don't have a copy of this. A wealthy man died, and as his soul was being taken to the heavenly court. Now, again, some of you may know the term purgatory.
Yeah.
So purgatory is the stage after death, before the heavenly court, God or the Malachei HaSharet, the ministering angels, before they've actually decided on whether or not you're going to go up to heaven or whether you're going to go down to eternal hell. This is not a statement of belief. It's only a literary device. Okay, they didn't believe in a heaven and a hell in that physical sense, but they used it as a teaching method. So purgatory is where you were, and we're going to see one or two of the most amazing stories about that when we go through the Yiddish literature. But purgatory is kind of this intervening stage where we're not sure if you're going up or down. Sometimes you had to appear before God, and there was a prosecuting angel against Satan who would argue on whether you should or whether you shouldn't. It's a whole body of literature. But again, it didn't reflect a particular theology or a particular belief. It was only literary and teaching pedagogic device, if you will. So a wealthy man died. His soul is being taken to the heavenly court. It passed through a palatial room where many spirits seemed to be in bliss. I've used some of these stories also in sermons. The rich man's soul begged permission to remain there. You may remain, answered the angel, providing you have the price of entrance. Of course, retorted the soul, and this was a wealthy man, I have brought an abundance of money with me. It's not money that's acceptable here, the angel replied. Do you see these charity receipts? It is these that are necessary for entrance to the palace. Let me go back to earth, pleaded the other man, and I shall convert my wealth into receipts from institutions of charity. Then I shall return here. Sorry, said the angel. It's too late. It's too late. Okay. So there are lots of stories of what happens, especially during this purgatory time, and what that purgatory environment might look like. So someone has to defend themselves, defend himself or herself, or learn a lesson of why you haven't immediately been accepted into heaven, or what's the last chance that you might have to prove that you're worthy. And by bringing receipts, that's not enough. So here are two. I'm just going to tell them quickly myself without reading them. That go along with that theme. And again, I apologize if you've heard these either from me or from other sources. So one man was brought, and some of them are rather off color also, and but I'm not going to do that today. So So a man is brought up, brought to purgatory, whatever, and he's being escorted by an angel, and it turns out that he's being given, not because he has a choice, but he's being given the opportunity to see both hell and heaven. Okay, and so he's taken to hell, and he sees this huge banquet room, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people sitting at magnificent tables, and there's the most lavish meal laid out on the tables in front of them, and everybody is looking at the meal as if they're ready to eat, until the man finally notices that no one is eating. And why? Because their elbows have all been, you can't see, I'm doing it here, their elbows have all been fixated in place, and they can't bend their elbows in order to get the food up to their mouths. So their hell literally is that they have to just sit there and look at all these delectable, this delectable food in front of them. Okay, all right, and Bev is giving it away. I don't know if anybody was looking. Okay, so then they go up to heaven to show them heaven, and it's the exact same room, exact same number of people, exact same meal, but there everyone is smiling between bites of food, because each one is taking a forkful or whatever and passing it feeding the person next to them. And that's heaven. Okay, so that's a description. That's a description. And then one of my absolute favorites, and I guarantee if you haven't heard this one from me yet, you will in the future. I use it a lot. I use it actually when I'm speaking with Christian groups too. There's a story of a famous rabbi. Actually, it's more of a Talmudic rabbi than a Hasidic rabbi, who's in the Promised Land. He's in Palestine, and he has a dream. And he dreams that the Messiah is sitting at the gates of, depending on who's telling the story in which generation, either he's sitting at the gates of Rome, or he's sitting at the gates of some major city, or he's sitting at the gates of Jerusalem, whatever generation you're telling the story. The rabbi says, "Oh, this dream was so vivid, I must go and see if indeed the Messiah is sitting at the gates of," fill in whichever city you want a city. And so he travels, and he gets there, and he walks up, and sure enough, there's the Messiah sitting like a beggar right by the gates. And the rabbi goes over to him and says, "Is it true? Are you the Messiah?" He says, "Yes, my son. Yes, Rabbi, I'm Messiah." "Messiah, what are you doing here? There are people who are dying. There are pogroms. There's sickness. There's illness. There's war. What are you doing here just sitting and waiting? What on earth are you waiting for?" And the Messiah looks at the rabbi and says, "Well, I've been waiting for you, so I could ask you, what on earth have you been waiting for?" Because again, the bottom line of that, there's really two messages. One is the feeling that the Messiah will come, as it were, or the end of days that we all pray for will come when we stop waiting and actually reach out and do what we're talking about, loving through serving, when we actually do some things. So it's not only a stop waiting, but it's also the stop praying, wasting all your time in praying. You can be optimistic, you can be hopeful, you can sing, you can dance, you can do those things that will bring joy into the world. That's your role, rather than just sitting around twiddling your thumbs and saying, well, we'll just wait till the Messiah comes and then everything will be better. Ricky, just one more thing. I say that with connection to, some of you may know, this was the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and the song that Rabin was helping to sing right before he was shot was a song that the Israelis used, Shir L'Shalom, that is based on this same thing. Okay, don't just wait for peace to come, for shalom to come, but go and don't just sit there and sing songs about peace, but actually go out and offer your hand in peace. Actually go out and work the land and bring about peace between people. That's the ultimate of shalom. That's the way that the Israelis would understand the story, but I leave it up to you to understand the story however you wish. Okay, Ricky, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. You made me think of a story that I know of. Elie Wiesel was speaking at an interfaith thing, and the Messiah is there. And blah, blah. Anyway, I'm not going to build up. I don't remember all the details. It's always the last line of the story that's important. And anyway, the Messiah is there, and the Christian says, "Hey, have you been here before?" And Elie Wiesel whispers, "Don't answer that."
Don't answer that. Right. Okay. Yeah.
You got it.
Right. Okay. Okay. So when we think of the Hasidim, and if you pictured either a Hasidic service or every year, I think they still do it in Jerusalem. There's a Hasidic music festival, if you have a mental image of a Hasidic gathering, there's going to be a lot of movement, people, moving around, mostly the men, not always, but mostly the men, moving around, dancing, singing, not necessarily with words. I mean, sometimes they will use words, and they won't write original words. They will only use words from the Torah or from the sacred literature, from the prayer book, whatever it might be. But so there's this statement. Call it a premise, a fundamental, foundational statement of Hasidic practice and life and lore, and that is this quote here, page 11, chapter 7. It is a sin to be sad. Okay, it's an avera. It's wrong. There are lots and lots of stories, but I want to use this to introduce you to a very, very interesting character. And like I mentioned last week, if we have the chance, if you like this kind of literature, and if you'd like to pursue it further, I would be glad to work up some sessions on a couple of these rabbis. I mentioned Nachman of Bratslav last week. Today is another one whose name you may have heard, and we'll talk about some samples of his, not so much the stories about him as the things that he actually did say, teach, and give to his disciples. That's Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, which, if you're following along on this page here, at the bottom of the page, on the page that says a sin to be sad. On the left-hand side at the bottom, a story tells how Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, one of the foremost teachers in Hasidism, learned something from a humble, illiterate Jew. On a certain Passover, Rabbi Yitzchak had celebrated the first Seder night with such grace and fullness of heart that at the end of it, he could not but feel proud and happy. But suddenly he heard a voice that said, "The Seder of Chaim the water carrier was more pleasing to me than yours." Okay, supposedly a message from God. In the morning, the rabbi asked his disciples to find out who this water carrier, Chaim the water carrier, was. And they found him in a tumble-down hut in the outskirts of town, and they brought him, still half asleep, to the rabbi. "Reb Chaim," said Levi Yitzchak, "what kind of Seder did you conduct last night?" The water carrier answered, shamefaced. Okay, he's talking to the chief rabbi, as it were. "What kind of Seder could an ignorant man like me conduct, Rebbe? I collected the leaven, but to tell you the truth, I forgot to burn it. But I remembered that one may not drink brandy during the 8 days of Passover. So I drank it all up enough for the 8 days. And the next thing I knew, my wife was shaking me and saying, 'Chaim, Chaim, it's evening, it's time for the Seder.' I answered, 'Can I conduct a Seder? All I know is that once upon a time we were slaves in Gypsy land, and we have a God, and he led us out of slavery into freedom. And I know that now we're slaves again, and God will again lead us into freedom.'" The water carrier hesitated. And then, Rabbi, suddenly from out of nowhere, there was a wonderful Passover table in front of us, filled with every kind of holiday food and wine. My wife and I ate and drank and were filled with happiness. I was bursting with so much joy that I lifted my wine cup to God and said, "See, God, I drink this to you. You bend down to us and make us free." Okay. So the importance of joy, the importance that even a simple water carrier or whatever, drunk, could have a more meaningful Seder and more acceptable to God than the leading rabbi of his time. Okay, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev is died. We don't know what date of birth exactly. Died in 1809. He was a disciple of one of the teachers that we mentioned last week, Dov Ber of Mezrich. And there are some very, very famous stories, anecdotes, and teachings about Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. One of his, it's not really a poem, but it's a prayer. It's recited in Yiddish. There are some congregations, not just Hasidic congregations, but there are some congregations that include Levi Yitzchak's prayer called "Du" in Yiddish. That's you, or those who prefer the ancient English, "thou," with you with a capital Y. And they include this being sung by the cantor or someone in the Yom Kippur afternoon service, that the part of the service that we call the martyrology, and that tells the history, especially the history in Europe. So here's just a little bit of it. This is an English translation, obviously, but this is Levi Yitzchak's song of you, again, capital Y. "Where I wander is you. Where I ponder is you. Only you. You again, always you. You, you, you. When I'm gladdened, you. When I'm saddened, you. Only you, you again, always you. You, you, you. Sky is you. Earth is you. You are above, you are below. In every trend, at every end. Only you, you again, always you. You, you, you. Do, do, do. In Yiddish. Okay, and that's heard on. Now, I found this one also, and I include it because I forget exactly who it was, but someone said last week, how come the literature, the Hasidic literature, is only filled with men's voices? I forget who it was who asked, but in response to that, Levi Yitzchak's wife, okay, is indeed mentioned in the literature. Her name was Pearl, easy for me to remember because that was my mother-in-law's name of blessed memory, okay? And she had a prayer that they wrote down in the literature, okay? From Pearl, the rabbi of Berdichev's wife. Whenever she kneaded and baked loaves for challah, for the Sabbath, she prayed, Ribono shel olam, Lord of the world, I beg you to help me, that when my husband Levi Yitzchak says his blessing upon these challahs on the Sabbath, he may have in mind what I have in mind at this very hour when I knead them and bake them in love for you. Very simple, but it is, somebody specifically mentioned last week that there wasn't enough of the women being mentioned. And so I did find that one. Here's another, now this is a longer version of one that I tell frequently as well. Levi Yitzchak once came to an inn. Many merchants were stopping on the way to market their wares. The place was far from Berdichev, so no one knew him. In the early morning, the guests wanted to pray, but since there was only a single prayer of phylacteries, of tefillin in the whole house, one after another put them on and rattled off their prayers quickly, and then handed the tefillin on to the next person. When they had all prayed, the rabbi called the young men to him and saying that he wanted to ask them something. When they all came close to him, he looked gravely into their faces and said, "Mama, mama, 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 va, 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 va." "What do you mean?" cried the young men. But he only repeated the same meaningless syllables, "Mama, mama, 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 va, 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 va." Then they took him to be a fool. But now he said, "How is it that you do not understand the language which you yourselves just used in speaking to God?" For a moment, the young men were taken back and stood silent. They had been criticized for the way that they just raced through their prayers and didn't pronounce any of the words. Then one of them said to the rabbi, "Have you never seen a child in the cradle who does not yet know how to put sounds together into words? Have you not heard the baby make babbling sounds, such as ma, 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 va, 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 va? All the sages and scholars in the world cannot understand him, but the moment his mother comes, she knows exactly what he means." And when the rabbi heard the answer, he began to dance for joy. And from that time on, whenever on the days of awe he spoke to God in his own fashion in the midst of prayer, he never failed to tell this answer to him. Okay, so the mother knows, and I might say in my experience now, the grandparents know as well, right? Okay, you know, is the child hungry? Is the child in pain? Is the child need a diaper? Whatever it might be, even if they can't verbalize that, but a parent knows. And similarly, even if someone's uttering their prayers only as va, 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 mama, and not pronouncing the words, God understands what the prayers would be. Okay. Then one more about with Levi Yitzchak. We will be coming back to him, but I don't know how many of you have actually seen a page of Talmud. And my Talmud is actually at the Temple building, and I'm home right now, so I can't hold it up and see. But a page of the Talmud is printed so, and when you refer to a quote in the Talmud, you refer to, for example, page 112a or 112b. Actually, it's 112 Aleph or Bet. Okay, all right. but the first page of every volume starts with the B side. There's no A side. There's no Aleph side. And the students asked Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, why is the first page number missing in all the volumes of the Talmud? Why does each begin with the second? Now, again, some of you have heard or we've studied it sometimes, like the Torah begins with the letter Bet, and there's all kinds of midrashic interpretation of that. But Levi Yitzchak's answer here is, however much a man may learn, he should always remember that he hasn't even gotten to the first page yet. Okay. There's always much, much, much more to learn. Okay, where are we time-wise? 3 o'clock. Let's only because we're talking about Levi Yitzchak, let's continue with him, and then if we have time, we'll come back. So, if you would, Quarrels with God, which is in this collection is page 17, or chapter 13, if you will. Now, the Torah study people from Saturday morning, you haven't gotten there yet this year, but some of you may remember from past years. Okay, or maybe it's this week. Marty, Jacob wrestling with the angel. Is that going to be this week? That's this week. Okay, right? Got okay. All right. There. Okay. I know. I remembered we were close, but I didn't remember if we got there actually. Okay. So if you remember that Jacob wrestles with the angel, and neither emerges shalem, neither of them emerges whole. Jacob emerges with a limp, but Jacob actually says to the angel, or to the stranger with whom he's wrestling, I will not let you go until you bless me. And the angel, or the stranger, however you want to define it, and if you have curiosity about this, here's an invitation to come to the Torah study class on Saturday. But the angel of the stranger says to Jacob, no longer shall your name be Jacob, but you shall be Yisrael. You shall be Israel, which is, again, a combination of words, or a mnemonic, even, if you will. Ki sarita im Elohim vatuchal. Because you wrestled with God, you argued with God, you fought with God, and you have emerged out of that experience. Okay, so Israel, or Yisrael, means those who struggle, or those who, in the case of the Hasidim, those who even argue with God. So quarreling with God, or wrestling with God, has been our legacy, has been our history, and we do it, again, from the Hasidic point of view, we do it with humility, but we also do it with approved fervor. Okay, those who quarrel with God, those who argue with God, those who complain to God, are indeed amongst the highest of the rabbis and of the saints, if you will. So follow along with me here on page 17, number 13. We'll pretty much look at the whole page here, because these are very famous stories here. With strangers and with those whom we have not yet learned to trust, we maintain a strictest of diplomatic relations. We speak correctly and precisely in formal language. We observe with the utmost punctiliousness every jot and tittle of prescribed etiquette, at least some people do. The one thing we would never do is quarrel in in public in that sense. We're supposed to be diplomatic. We're supposed to be discreet, polite. But the Hasidim had frequent occasion to deal with officialdom and even with royalty. They knew exactly how to address the smallest official in their villages. Again, and we'll talk about this in 2 weeks. Is if you have the mental image picture in your mind, the way that Tevye and his shtetl people and Anatevka, the way that they had to defer to the Russian, the authorities, the policemen, things like that. They always had to be polite and official. And there's the joke of may God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. But on the other hand, there's also the expectation that we will pray for the welfare of the government, in a diplomatic, polite, and respectful way. However, with the master of the universe, the Lord of creation, the author of all things, the divine judge on the heavenly throne, with God, Father in heaven, they had a different relationship. With him, the Hasidim would occasionally quarrel. And the most famous one is Lev Yitzchak of Berdichev's prayer or argument with God or wrestling with God on Yom Kippur, the middle of the afternoon. He stops his service and says the following: "Oh God, if I am to repent my poor sins, then you will have to repent yours. I've committed only small sins, little sins. I may have held back a leftover cloth, a button or two. Perhaps I forgot once or twice to wash my hands before saying the bracha, before saying hamotzi, the blessing over food. But you," now this is the same you that he had written the song about before, capital Y. "But you have taken babies from mothers and mothers from babies. I'll tell you what, Lord, if you forgive me, then I'll forgive you, and we'll call it even." Reb Levi Yitzchak, who was standing by the tailor to prompt his every word, nodded his head in agreement, but then he bethought himself and asked the tailor, "Why did you let God off so easily? If you had gone on, you might have forced God to redeem all of Israel." Another Yom Kippur, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak stopped in the middle of his prayers to bargain with God. "God," he said, let me remind you of how your people Israel took your Torah when no other people in the world would even look at it." Now, you might remember this. This is a famous midrash, okay? "You went from people to people like a peddler of apples. And if Israel had not taken the Torah from you, your Torah would have rotted. Okay. Remember, God in the story, God goes to the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Egyptians and will you take my 10 commandments? Well, what does they say? Thou shalt not steal. Oh, wait a minute, we're marauders. We can't accept that. And and on and on and on. And finally, God goes to the children of Israel, says, will you accept the 10 commandments? Now, some people say, and the Jews asked, how much do they cost? But that's a different kind of joke. But the answer in the Torah, the answer is na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will heed. We will accept your word and whatever. Okay. So if we hadn't accepted it, Lev Yitzchak is saying, so let me propose a deal. You exchange your forgiveness and atonement for our sins and misdeeds. It's a good exchange. For what would you do with your forgiveness if we had no sins? To help you get rid of your wares, I ask only a small bonus besides. Give us life. Give us chayim, right? Give us life and good health and a year of ample food. Okay. So Lev Yitzchak of Berdichev argues with God. That's his prayer. That's his, listen, if there's a covenant, if this is a holy agreement, you've got a part to play. We've been doing our part all these years as best as we could. Don't forget your part. Okay. The bottom of the middle column, The surest way to pick a quarrel is to begin to question a person's aims and to doubt his word. Hasidim did not hesitate to do this with God. Okay, a man came to Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk, who was a disciple of Levi Yitzchak. He was worried and beset with doubts. Rabbi, he said, please help me. I'm deeply troubled and I can do nothing to help myself. Why are you so worried? Asked the rabbi. I have something to worry about, said the visitor. Is there a judge and a judgment? I see so much evil in the world that I wonder, is there a judge who sees all this? The rabbi asked, why does this worry you so? The man was indignant. Reb Mendel, he said, if there is no judge and no judgment, what is life all about? Why does this worry you so? Repeated the rabbi. Now the visitor was beside himself. But Rebbe, if there's no judge and judgment, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no Israel. If there's no Israel, there is no. He could not bring himself to utter the final blasphemous thought. And why should all that worry you? Reb Mendel, cried the man, and he burst out into tears. Why should I not worry? All right, said Reb Mendel, if all this matters so much to you, then worry as much as you wish. And then he smiled at his bewildered visitor. It proves you're a good Jew after all. For only a good Jew can worry about all these kinds of things, right? It's not the Alfred E. Newman "What Me Worry," you know. It's not that. But our task as Jews is to worry, is to seek meaning in all of these things that we do for each other, that we do in our and we try to understand God. That we do, going back to some of the earlier stories, that we do in serving, whether it's serving humanity, whether it's serving all of God's creatures, and that's the way that that they understood that. I had one more. Let me see if I can find the note. And here. Okay, let me conclude with this one. Okay, this is one that I found. If you go back to, I guess it's number 8 about humility and honesty, but I found this one talking about the best ways to serve God, and found this one also, talking about humility. A man came to his Rebbe and besought him to teach him humility. The very moment that he was speaking, the clock struck the hour. The rabbi commented, from the sound of the clock striking the hour, we can receive ample instruction regarding the submission of our hearts. Each one of us should ask ourselves, another hour of my life has departed. Have I accomplished any improvement of myself or anything for my fellow human being within that hour? So once Rabbi Zushia turned earthward and said, Earth, thou art of a better make than I, and yet I am treading thee underfoot. Softly, yet a while, and I will be below thee, thy humbly servant. In other words, with every step that I take, recognizing that while I may be on top of the earth right now, treading on the earth, ultimately I'm going to be below the earth. And then he goes on with a story about 2 of the greatest scholars of their time. Now, this is a Hasidic rabbi who's talking about Talmudic scholars. They were traveling by carriage to the city. The city that's mentioned happens to be Prague. The Jews, and this has got to be legend because there was no Prague and a Jewish community at the time of the Talmud. So you know, you got me, okay? The Jews of Prague were overjoyed at the prospect of these 2 scholars coming to visit. In their enthusiasm to show honor to the rabbis, they streamed out of the gates to meet the carriage while it was still on the road. The 2 scholars were immersed in words of Torah, obviously, as the carriage was on its way. But finally, they noticed the extraordinary sight of a great mass of people cheering them. And in their love the people were unharnessing the horses and themselves pulling the carriage toward the city. One of the rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, not the famous Rabbi Akiva, but this is a different Rabbi Akiva, was deeply moved. And he looked out on his side of the carriage at the hundreds of people, and he wondered why they'd come. Of course, he thought, they came to honor my traveling companion. I too will honor him. So Rabbi Akiva got out of the carriage on his side and began to pull along with all the rest of the people, and was quickly swallowed up by the mob and disappeared. The other rabbi is known as the Khatam Sofer, as I guess we would translate it that as the ultimate scribe. It was known for his calligraphy. Okay, the ultimate scribe, and he looked out on his side of the carriage and likewise wondered why these people had come, saying to himself, they must have come to honor the great prince of Torah, Rabbi Akiva. And he was so immersed in his thought, he didn't notice that Akiva had gotten out the other side. And so I too will honor him, he said. So he stepped down from the carriage on his side and helped to pull along with all the others. And when at last the carriage reached the city and came through the gates of the city and came into the courtyard of the synagogue, and the doors of the carriage were open, it was found to be empty. Okay? The ultimate of humility is the way that they teach that lesson. So with that, I'm going to conclude officially. If somebody has comments, questions, whatever, the plan is that in 2 weeks, next week is Thanksgiving, and I encourage you to enjoy as best as we can and enjoy the holiday. And as my close friend, late, most of you know some of her music, the late Debbie Friedman, as she said, be glad that you're not a turkey on this Thanksgiving Day, but whatever. But so next Thursday we'll take a pass, and then for the first 2 Thursdays in December, we'll look at some of the Yiddish stories. I want to especially focus on Shalom Aleichem and the Tevye stories, but there are certainly some others. And then one of my favorite writers, and we'll do this in obviously in English, is Yud Lamed Peretz, and some of his stories also from that same genre. But if anybody has any questions or comments for a minute or two, or questions, I'll certainly try to answer, respond. Yeah, Bobby, please.
Could you do Shalom Aleichem as the next session up when we come back?
Yeah, we'll
after
do Shalom
Thanksgiving?
Aleichem in 2 weeks, and then
Because I'll be
Peretz the week
gone
after
the
that.
following.
Gotcha. Okay.
I might be gone the following, and I want to hear
Okay.
that one. Thank you.
Please, Cher, please.
This goes back to another story
Yeah.
tonight from today. The one about being sad and it being a sin, I've never heard that before, so I'm a little taken aback. Maybe you can explain it.
Yeah, well, I can explain it in the sense of remember the environment in which it was being written and what the population was like. They're in the shtetl, they're impoverished, perhaps facing anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And some of them are feeling, on the one hand, feeling depressed. On the other hand, they're feeling guilty or inadequate, perhaps, because they can't spend the time studying or doing things that would have marked an acknowledgement of prosperity or success. And it's not like the Hasidic rabbi would be able to snap his fingers and give them those kind of success. But on the other hand, he could say to them that you can find meaning, and God appreciates your worship, your service, whatever, in these little acts, you know, putting a bandage, using your own tefillin to heal the leg of a rabbit. Okay, you know, that kind of a thing. Or joy. If you don't know the words, just kind of sing a nigun, sing a na na la 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 la. If you don't know don't feel inferior in your prayer mode if you don't know the words. That God understands, even if you're just saying la la la. And we can all find joy. We can all bring joy, especially on Shabbos. Okay, because we have such a difficult time in the rest of the week. We can still find, we must use that opportunity to bring a little bit of joy into our life.
And what you had just said, I can't help but think how that applies to our lives right now during these times.
Mhm.
You know?
Sure.
So, thank you.
Unfortunately, sure.
Yeah, we can relate.
Sure.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, glad to. Anyone else? Gail, please.
Yes, we were talking earlier at the beginning about doing good deeds without being compensated.
Uh-huh.
But I've always thought that giving anonymously is probably even better. Because you can kind of, I mean, I'm sure we've all done this, given something anonymously. And you kind of can sit back with a little chuckle and watch and see what happens with your anonymous gift. And no one needs to know. It's your little secret.
Right.
You know.
Well, so here's the, you know, here's, and it's a discussion, and even I remember doing a class on this. I think it was 1 year on Slichot, actually, that we did a study of different texts on the notion of giving in the sense that you're talking about it, as charity, if you will, as opposed to tzedakah, that Maimonides, I'm sure many of you are familiar that Maimonides has this particular, you know, hierarchy, and that's of tzedakah rather than avodah. Okay, so one is in the context, if you use the translations that I was talking about before, one is in the context of divine service, that you are doing it for a particular purpose of serving God, whereas tzedakah, which is incorrectly translated as charity, it's not charity, it's righteous behavior, of which charity is one particular component or one example, all right? But righteous behavior is not serving God. Okay, who benefits from righteous behavior? Yes, the recipient, but also, as you're saying, I myself benefit because I feel so much better, and that's irrespective of the you know, getting the merit badge or the stars on our forehead or whatever it might be. Yeah, so there is a distinction there. Fran, please.
Reminds me of a story in this vein of the rabbi is with some of his congregants, and a poor person comes and the rabbi gives to him, and they say, well, Rabbi, you already gave this morning. And the rabbi says, well, if I didn't give, then you might see this as an excuse not to give.
Mm-hmm.
You can make that a fancier story, but.
Yeah. Okay, right. No, we got it. Right, thanks. Okay, Ruth Ann, you're on.
I'm on. Well,
You
Just-
are.
tomorrow night service.
I'm on
so
again.
You're on again.
Okay.
Mary Dale has been practicing, so I don't know if she feels up to it. I might let her drive tomorrow. So, you know, everybody please be patient because
I'm not sure everybody understands what you're talking about.
Okay, well, Mary Dale and Dan Gallitz are both learning how to run the computer end of the service so that I can possibly take a day off. It's always been my biggest worry that I'd get sick and it doesn't have to be COVID to be sick. And then the service won't get streamed. So Maridel hopefully will be able to take over tomorrow if she feels up to it. So be patient if there's some boo-boos and some snafus, more than what I make anyhow. It's because Maridel is driving there. And Saturday's Torah studies. And next week is Thanksgiving.
Right,
So
okay.
that's what we have to live up to. And Les, I can't wait for you to come back and see our new setup. And then you can add to the setup. But Rabbi, nobody else is going to know this, but Rabbi, your monitor is working.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good.
Uh-huh. We
right.
got it figured out. So
Okay.
it's, yeah.
And
Wait.
and we will continue with the tradition of an Adon Olam from coming around the world. But I will probably say tomorrow, unless I get to do the research, it's a surprise, and I don't know exactly where it's from. It's not from North America. I do know that.
Huh.
But I don't know exactly where it's from. I have my thoughts, but you'll watch it and enjoy. It's an Adon Olam that's joyful,
Huh.
but see if you can identify where it comes from.
Okay. I'll preview it. I usually don't preview.
No.
stuff.
You
I
don't
can
get special. You don't
preview
get special preview.
I liked the African Caribbean, whatever it was, Adon Olam this last.
Yeah, it was African with calypso, according to Mike.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that was
Right.
Enkelahenu.
Oh, that was in Kelhaina,
Oh, that's
right?
okay.
Yeah.
Enkelahenu.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Bye.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Fantastic
Rabbi.
class.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you
Love
soon.
this.
Bye.
Happy
Okay,
Turkey Day. Bye.
everyone else, bye-bye.